Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Gus Kattengell with you, along with Mr. Jim Eichenhofer, who's feeling better, looking better, wearing his Christmas icy white pullover today. Man, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing better, Gus, but unfortunately, I think people probably can tell by my voice if they listen to this podcast all the time that I still don't sound totally like myself. I was making a run at Joel Myers level for a couple days over the weekend. I was trying to get that deep sound, and I was doing a pretty good job of it. Fortunately, I'm a little bit closer back to normal, but haven't totally shaken it. I know people listen to this podcast for Pelicans news, not my health updates, but I will suffice to say that there was definitely a couple days there where if someone had told me you can lose your sense of smell for a few days in exchange for whatever you're dealing with, I would have been like, I'll take that trade every time.
Really?
But I'm getting closer, so hopefully, like some of the guys on the roster, I will be back to 100% soon.
It's that time of the year, like when you go to any store right now, there's Christmas music or jingle bells and stuff like that in the background. I don't know what it's like to go anywhere and not hear a cough from somebody. I mean, it's what it is. So, but we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
All right, look, we talked about it with Andrew Lopez, who filled in for you on Friday. About
and
the
you guys
game
did a great
Thursday.
job, by the way, too.
I appreciate that.
So,
you see, we included your part. We did a trending number.
Yes.
We did the weekend showdown, which I can't wait to get your opinion on that. I guess, look, last night or yesterday evening, however you want to look at it, Pelicans at the Pacers. Let's get to it and see what took place there. This is what it sounded like on the Pelicans Radio Network. The voice of the Pelicans, Ty Graffinini.
And the long rebound comes to Trey Murphy. Good box out there by Misi. Trey front court right, drives center of the lane, and will throw it down with two hands between two Pacer defenders. And that prompts Rick Carlisle to call a timeout. Bad intentions. Kenneth Murphy the third, and he's got an angry look on his face. McCollum is wide open, fakes the three, up top Murray. Murray drives right lane line, pops one from 10 and down. Nothing but net. That's our first field goal since the 9:03 mark. We nearly went 4 minutes. 14-10 Indiana. Javante, into Tice, bounce feed, backdoor cut Boston, lost it on the baseline, somehow found Green, back into the lane, another tough pass to Boston, and he lays it in with a left hand. Boy, we butchered that, but still got a layup out of it. Herb, left wing three, short. Strong side rebound, Mathurin. Under 2 minutes left in the second quarter. This is one of those quarters for the Pels, which have doomed us here during this streak. Turner down low. Blocked by Murphy, and Turner gets it back and is fouled and one. That sums it up. That absolutely sums it up. Turner got blocked by Murphy, attempting a dunk. It goes right back to Turner, and then it's an N1 as Herb fouled him. Nembhard, right angle, Halliburton, 4-3, and good. 70-51. Halliburton doing it to us again. 4 of 7 from beyond the arc, and now a steal on a bad pass from CJ. Halliburton with a reverse dunk. 72-51 Indiana. Halliburton now with 17, and we turn it over again. Halliburton drives in, throws up a prayer off the glass and in. Willie Green will take a timeout. 8:10 to go, third quarter. And the place is as loud as it's been the entire ball game. As Indiana up by 23. And drives in. Righty scooping layup off the box. Good. And one. Siakam saved it in the left corner. Now he gets to the left elbow. Papa mid-range short. We can't rebound it. Back out to Toppin. Papa left corner three. Yes. We had the rebound with Boston. He couldn't corral it. McConnell spins left into the lane. Back up top, Siakam, straightaway three. Yep. 14 of 29 are the Pacers from beyond the arc. Siakam now with 14 points. 99-80. 104-84, 7.5 to go. McCollum, bounce feed to Boston, left wing three. Yes. Brandon Boston now 18 points. That leads the Pelicans. And this is off the bench. Nembhard threw it right to Herb Jones. Steal. Herb, bounce feed to Boston. Reverse lefty, layup, dances and falls. Another timeout, Rick Carlisle. So the Pacers are left with one timeout. And the Pels have trimmed it to 13.
All right, so 119-104 was your final there as the Pels did make a run for it. Jim, when you take a look at the game overall, we're going to hear from head coach Willie Green and Brandon Boston. Was there something that stood out to you, maybe a statistic that was a little misleading, perhaps?
Yeah, I thought when you look at the total turnovers of the Pelicans had 18 and the Pacers had 17, that might be the most misleading stat I've seen in a long time, because if you just look at that on paper, you think, okay, that's a wash. You know, both teams turned the ball over a pretty high amount in the upper teens. You know, that wasn't a factor in the game. But, I mean, if you look at it, it was a huge factor in the game. Part of it that Indiana had 25 points off turnovers. The Pelicans only had 14. So, obviously, there was a huge differential in terms of the teams being able to capitalize on the mistakes that the other team made. I mean, the Pelicans are in a position right now, too. They only scored 104 points. As we know, in the 2024 NBA version of the game, that's a very low number. They have to be able to capitalize on other teams' turnovers as much as possible just to generate as much scoring as they possibly can. But, I mean, in this instance, I think, and we heard this in the graph highlights too, how often the Pacers were able to turn a backcourt turnover into a dunk or a layup at the other end. I mean,
and it's a momentum too.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that there's also a demoralizing aspect to some turnovers. People who play basketball can totally understand this concept. There's turnovers where you're being aggressive, where, okay, you're driving into the paint, you draw a couple guys, you throw an alley-oop to Zion, it gets tipped away, the other team picks it up, it's a turnover, but at least it was an aggressive play where you're trying to get to the basket, you're trying to set somebody else up for a shot, and obviously that's one of the highest percentage attempts at the basket the Pelicans can get, which is Zion in the paint or Zion right at the rim. But I think one of the things that has happened a lot in the last couple of games is some of these turnovers are more that a player is going one-on-one and he's looking for his own shot, and maybe he drives towards the basket, doesn't get where he wants to go, gets stripped of the ball. And I think what happens again, people who play basketball, who have played basketball, understand this concept. I feel like guys don't run back as hard or as fast as they would, because those are the kind of turnovers that really kind of eat away at a team's morale, because it's very discouraging when those kind of turnovers are made. So that's been one thing that I think has really stood out, is that it's not even necessarily a conscious thing, but I feel like when those are the kind of turnovers that you make, it's really eats away at the transition defense, and you can kind of see it on the court. I mean, so many things are going against the Pelicans as it is right now that I feel like those plays are even more costly than they normally are. And you can't do that against the Pacers. They have guys like Obi Toppin, who he's one of the best players in the league at running the floor, and he'll end up with a bunch of dunks if that's what you do. If you make mistakes and you let the Pacers guards get the ball, they have tons of options on both the three-point arc and guys that are going all the way to the basket, like Toppin and some of their other big guys.
The Pelicans shooting 39%, 38 of 97, 10 of 33 for 30%. So to your point, I mean, when you're struggling to shoot and make baskets and you're adding turnovers, you're just really not giving yourself a good chance to win games. And then there's this. And Coach Willie Green had this to say after the game.
First half, really, I just didn't feel our sense of urgency in the first half. Just some silly mistakes, a little sloppy. I thought we got better in the second half. I'll go back and watch the tape, but I thought our competitive juices were going in the second half. But we got to have that sense of urgency to start the game and give them credit. They, a really good team. They share the ball. They play with pace and force. They're getting it up quickly, and we just got to be better.
Brandon Boston had 20 points off the bench. He was asked after the game, what was the difference between the first and second half?
Just the energy. I feel like we start off and put 4 quarters together with the right energy, we'll be solid.
We've heard that a lot this season. Head coach Willie Green saying even in the loss to San Antonio and then the loss here on Thursday, you're playing 3 quarters, got to get 4 quarters. And then you have a game like this where he goes, well, it's starting the game with that sense of urgency. Look, I'm just looking at it, as plainly as a sheet of paper here. Right? You have 5 wins. I would think you'd have some sort of sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is it that, or is it still this team's trying to learn to play together with a certain lineup that you have and such? Because I think that could make sense to an extent, but this is what Boston said about it.
Yeah, I feel like anything in life, like you have different changes, it's hard, especially in the league that we're in. There's guys or teams that have been playing all year round with the same lineup, no injuries, but, we got that end of the stick. But there's things that we can't control, and that's just going out there with energy, playing hard and playing together on both sides.
I think some of what he's talking about and what we've been talking about too is there's also certain player types in the NBA that you look to for energy. And I use Jose Alvarado as a good example of that. I think right now, this is no slight to the players that the Pelicans have, but that are available right now. But you have guys that you don't really think of them as energy guys. You think of them as more as like scorers and skilled players and that kind of thing. So, I think that's part of it too. But based on the fact that you've had so many days between games lately, I do think that that's disappointing that, you had plenty of time to be ready for this game on Sunday. So I don't think there's really a reason that you can say, okay, well, we didn't have energy because of X, Y, Z. They've only played a couple games over the last, 8-10 days, something like that. They also have a big gap before they play on Thursday as well. So that's definitely something that you can't continually say. It's definitely something within your control in terms of how much energy you play with and that kind of thing. But I do think that the Pelicans, whether it's guys that change teams in the offseason, Najee Marshall is a good example of that, or guys that are on the team now that are out with injury, with Jose being a really good example of that some of that energy that you rely upon is not there right now. So the guys that are playing, whether it's one guy or 3 guys or the entire team, they're going to have to take it upon themselves to bring that and make sure that there's no more instances where after the game the head coach is saying things would have gone better if we played with more energy. Yeah.
Final note on this game?
Yeah, it's definitely some challenges involved when we're shorthanded. And I think our guys feel that. They feel that the margin for error is super small. We got to take care of the ball. You got to make shots. You got to get stops and convert when we turn other teams over. Just 3 areas that we, didn't do necessarily a great job in tonight, but it's definitely some challenges when you're shuffling lineups and you're trying to get guys acclimated to playing with each other. But, it's just a part of what the adversity that we have to go through in the NBA, and it's also an opportunity for guys to step up and play some larger roles.
All right, so let's get into basically what you just heard Coach say there, Jim, and what I hear and what I take out of that is there's a lot of ingredients right now where the team is that needs to happen for it to create a win. It's for whatever reason, just like in the past, whether it's injuries, not having your players, whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things they're having to check off for them to get to a position to even win. Mm-hmm. You kind of hit on it already a little in depth, though. Turnovers. It's something like Brandon Boston is saying, or other players are saying, look, we can't control lineups. We can't control if the threes go down or not. We can't control if the ball careens this way for us to get a rebound or not. But man, the live ball turnovers, and to your point that you've brought up a lot of times, and Todd brings it up in the broadcast there as well, some of those are just a pass that is just not going to happen there. Forcing situations. Mm-hmm. Coach even talked about that yesterday. Just in the game, even before, back on Thursday, just turnovers that maybe shouldn't happen, if that makes any sense. You're not helping yourself. What do you look at with the turnover situation with this team?
One of the things that Willie Green has talked about, and he said in that clip as well, is discussing the margin of error, that, the team is shorthanded, so there's a feeling that, we don't have as much room to make mistakes. And I think what bleeds from that sometimes is the feeling of I have to do more, I have to do too much. The players don't see it as I have to do too much. They see it as I have to do more. But what it leads to sometimes is players being way more aggressive than they need to be. And, Antonio Daniels also talked about this on the TV broadcast, especially in the last couple games, of that it's important to use a baseball analogy, it's important to not go for a home run every time. Sometimes a single works. Sometimes you just pass to the guy who's open 10 feet from you. He might not be in a position to score, but at least at least you're not passing to a guy who's double or triple teamed, and maybe, he has a 10% chance of catching the ball and putting it in the basket, but the other 90% is that it's going to be knocked away. So it's a risk that's not worth taking. And for whatever reason, the Pelicans definitely have been trying to hit home runs constantly. And I think, over time, it's going to be impossible to overcome that. So, and one specific thing too, DeJounte Murray is a good example of, last week I talked about things that have gone right, things that have gone wrong. I don't have enough for an entire segment of this week, but I was almost thinking about doing things I can't believe that have happened so far this season.
Yeah.
But, one of the things, DeJounte Murray, I'll give you some stats too. From his last 2 San Antonio seasons where I think the role that was closest to what the role he is now with the Pelicans, you kind of have to throw out his 2 years with Atlanta, because when he was playing alongside Trae Young, he was off the ball a lot more. Whereas DeJounte's last 2 years with the Spurs, he was the point guard. He was the guy that's running the offense. He was what the Pelicans, I think, pictured for him to be here.
Right.
So in his last 2 seasons combined, his assist-to-turnover ratio was 3.3, which is extremely good. He had 990 assists, 297 turnovers over those 2 seasons. This season so far with the Pelicans, obviously it's not that many games.
Sure.
His assist-to-turnover ratio is only 1.6. So he had twice as good of an assist-to-turnover ratio in his last 2 years with the Spurs than what he's done so far with the Pelicans. He has 68 assists and 42 turnovers for New Orleans so far. So I think, though, and again, I go back to, if you look at the track record of this guy's career, not just those 2 seasons that I pointed out with the Spurs, but his entirety of the time that he's been in the NBA, this is such an aberration. If you look at his assists and turnovers, that ratio is so out of whack from what he's done throughout the 8 years that he's been in the league. So, how much of that is he just needs to settle in more? How much of it is that he was out for a month or whatever it was with the injury? How much of it is that he's just trying to get back into a rhythm as a player and get used to guys on his new teammates? How much of it is that he has to settle into the role more of like, I don't need to go out there and score 25, 30 points a game. Even though we have a bunch of guys out, it's better to, clean up the turnovers, maybe try to be a little bit less aggressive, try to make sure other guys are getting involved in the offense. He's getting a decent amount of assists too, so it's not like he's not passing the ball or getting guys involved, but that's definitely a part of what we're seeing so far.
I'm watching Will Guillory last night at the end of the game, and we had him on the podcast last week, and he tweets something that's just, it kind of just speaks to maybe the unbelievableness of the season. DeJounte Murray, and to your point, he tied a career high last night with 8 turnovers. So in 480 games over his career, the highest level of turnovers he's ever had is 7. In 480 games. He's turned it over 8 times in back-to-back games with the Pelicans on Thursday and on Sunday.
Yeah, that's the definition of hard to believe.
Go ahead.
That's it right there.
Yeah, right. It's literally, it's the kind of season you're having. And I think it's a little bit of everything, Jim. It's pressing. It's trying to create plays. It's understanding the margin for error. It's small. It's trying to make runs. It's not having played with these players here as well. So that's one element of it, when you look at it from that perspective. The other thing you heard me mention that maybe kind of dictates as to why the Pels are having trouble winning. It's been an issue all season long, and again, it does have to do with injuries and not having those players, but three-point shooting. But it doesn't seem overwhelming last night. 16 made threes for the Pacers to 10 made threes for the Pelicans, but 16 times 3 is more than 10 times 3. And that's the aspect of it, right? Look, Trey Murphy, 2 of 10. DeJounte Murray, 2 of 3. Sage McCollum, 1 of 5. When you look at those 3 in particular, those are probably your best 3-point shooters right now on the court for the Pelicans. What do you see numbers-wise?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to set aside DeJounte's stuff because he was on the Hawks last year, but I think Trey, Herb, and CJ, those three guys, I mean, obviously they all played for the Pelicans last season, and I touched on this a little bit last week as well as far as the drop-off between those two guys, so I don't want to go through each individual guy, but if you take all three of those guys together last season, they took 1,275 three-point attempts, so we're talking a pretty large sample. As a group, they shot 40.9% from three-point range. This season, they've taken 270 as a group, and they're at 32.2%. So, I mean, just to use kind of a comparison, that's kind of interesting. So, as I said, they shot 40.9% as a trio last season. This season, Cleveland is leading the NBA as a team at 39.9. So 40.9 from those three guys. Cavs 39.9, number one in the league. This season, 32.2 for Murphy, Jones, and McCollum. The Houston Rockets are also shooting 32.2% as a team this season, and that ranks Houston 28th in the league. So you see, I mean, we're talking a percentage that is between those three guys that's comparable to the number one team in the league this season, and then comparable to the 28th best team. So, I mean, to me, that kind of illustrates how much of a difference there has been. I mean, there's definitely games like you mentioned. The game yesterday, was that a monumental factor? Maybe not, but I mean, it was still 18 points that the Pacers scored more than the Pelicans. But when you draw it out over the course of the 27 games that the Pelicans have played, and you take away all those points that if the team was shooting closer to 40% than 30%, I mean, that's a huge difference when you're taking as many threes as every team across the league is. So there's no doubt that that's a huge part of why the Pelicans are in the bottom tier of the league in offensive efficiency. I didn't think that there was any combination. Again, this is going back to hard to believe. I didn't think there was really any combination of Pelicans players that you could put on the court, or maybe more to the point, take off the court and have them be in the bottom of the league on offense, because you figure even with the guys that are out right now, with the talent that the Pelicans can put on the floor in the starting lineup with the players that I just mentioned,
right?
You would think this isn't going to be a team that's near the bottom of the league. There's tons of teams that have less talent than they do, even with this combination of guys. But when you shoot threes the way that they have as a team overall and some of the players individually, it's a lot easier to understand why they're having a hard time, clearing 100 points, which leads to almost certain losses in a lot of these cases against different opponents.
I think the thing, too, that I looked at the beginning of the month in December is it was go time. This was the time to kind of make a run here or just start, getting some wins. Look, no, it's not my word. CJ McCollum, after practice, said, look, when we all started getting back healthy, we're going to have to win a bunch of games here, because the margin for error seems to be the phrase for this season. It is going to be even thinner. And the more you don't win games, the further and further postseason really becomes a reality here. And we're halfway through the month of December, Jim. Not many wins. And now you got a homestand that, again, you're at home for 5 games. But they're not easy, are they?
No, not at all. And unfortunately, I mean, I think I said at the beginning of December, maybe mid-November, late November, when they were 6-8 games under 500, my fear is you're going to get further below 500, and they're 17 under 500 right now, 17 games under 500, I should say. So, I mean, I don't even think you can have a play-in tournament conversation until you get closer to 500, which they're a long way from that. But in terms of the homestand coming up and the schedule that they have coming up, I mean, they have the game Thursday at Houston, and then they go right into 5-game homestand. But, I mean, they have 7 games in a row here coming up against teams that are over 500. And of those 7 teams, 6 games are against teams that are in the top 5 of their conference. So I'll go through this real quickly. At Houston Thursday, they're 3rd in the West. New York is 3rd in the East. Denver's 5th in the West. Houston, again, the second time against the Rockets, that one will be in the Smoothie King Center. They're 3rd in the West. Memphis is 2nd in the West. The Clippers are the outlier. They're 9th in the West, but they still have a good record. And then on New Year's Day, they're playing at Miami, and the Heat are 5th in the East. So, I mean, you just go through that. 6 out of 7 games, top 5 teams in their conference. There's no easy stretch in the schedule. I mean, if you want to look at the the if there is a good part of it, I do think that some of these home games are not opponents that you want to see on the schedule, but I do think that they're going to make for maybe a little bit more compelling games than if they're playing against some of the bottom tier teams where fans may not be quite as interested in those type of games. But I mean, it's a challenge. There's definitely no let up in this schedule. You're definitely not looking at anything over the horizon where you're just like, oh, those are games that are much easier to win. This is all going to be tough.
And look, at this point, whether it's battling things you're doing to yourself like turnovers, maybe not shooting as well as you would like with the 3-point shooting, like we're talking about, lineup changes, it's already tough enough. And now you're going to be playing teams that maybe haven't had to deal with those challenges again. I'll never forget. What's the stat when the team played at New York against the Knicks, where they basically had two
different starting lineups? Yeah,
the Pels have had
17 or 18.
So crazy. So I mean, look, but again, I think there's reasons certain teams, Jim, are where they are in the standings, and certain reasons why teams are where they are on the other side. So
yeah, I mean, Houston is a good example. 2 of the next 4 games for the Pelicans are against the Rockets. I mean, they have everything set in place. We saw the way that they looked during the NBA Cup, where, I mean, they gave Oklahoma City a very good game in the semifinals. They beat Golden State by a point, and before that, they seem like they're already kind of like trending towards the postseason and being ready for the playoffs. It does help to be able to put the same group of guys or a very similar group of guys on the court constantly. New York is the same way, which starts the homestand. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these teams are at the point in the season where they're no longer like trying to figure out each other and, put name tags on their shirts and say like, hey, who are you? Like kind of the Pelicans are with constantly putting new players in the mix. So, I mean, that part of it, that makes it tough too, that you just see some of these teams have developed so much more chemistry than the Pelicans have.
Yeah, it's so tough when you look at it from that perspective. But all you can do is go out there and play the games and see if things start to turn around.
Well, it's a Monday. Thankfully, Jim is always our Friday. It's time for Mr. Eichenhofer to give his players of the week and a player to watch for this week. What you got, big guy?
Well, thank you, Mallory. And, to be honest with you, Gus, I'm glad that we're almost at the end of the show today because even though people aren't going to know this from listening to the recording, but I think I took about an 8-minute respite there. I was like sitting on the bench trying to get myself back together.
Happened. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Gus is so good that you'll never know that, but I had to step aside for a little while. Anyways, got to save my voice here. The player of the week for the Pelicans, to me, I mean, they only played 2 games. To me, it's got to be Brandon Boston. He averaged 14.5 points, which, is not too crazy of a number. But coming off the bench, he now has scored double-figure points in 6 of the last 7 games. He had 20 points against Indiana. He's been a consistently positive factor, I think, over the last couple weeks where the Pelicans have had a hard time getting wins. So, tip of the cap to him. And by the way, he's now second on the team in total minutes played this season at 664. Yves Missi has taken the lead at 668. So Pelicans no longer have a 2-way contract guy leading in total minutes, but he's still pretty darn close. And it's funny, I noticed this as well, that Brandon Ingram is still third on the team in total minutes with 595. Even though he's missed 9 out of the last 12 games, he's still third on that list. And lastly, Gus, the player to watch over the next 7 days, Pelicans are playing at Houston. Then they have home games on the weekend against New York and Denver. The player to watch is going to be Yves Missi based on partly the competition. I mean, he's going through the gauntlet of quality centers over this next stretch. Alperen Şengün for the Rockets is a tough matchup. Karl Anthony Towns for the Knicks. And then he has to go against none other than Jokic on Sunday for the Nuggets. So, but Yves Missi, this will be really fun to see how he performs against these guys. We're talking about different style of players that he's going up against, but in December, Missi has averaged 12.1 points, 11.1 rebounds, and 1.1 blocks per game. Still among the leaders across the league, among rookies in those categories. So he's my player to watch, and I guess it's time to go, Gus.
There it is. It is time to go. And on that note, though, I will leave you with this. Willie Green yesterday on Brandon Boston.
I think his confidence is growing more and more as he progresses throughout the season. He's understanding his role. He started some games for us. Right now he's in the second unit, but he's getting solid minutes each and every game, and he's very confident in what he can do once he touches the floor.
Yeah, so there you go. We'll see what takes place. Jim, we'll see you again on Wednesday, sir. And thank you, as always, for tuning us in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcast. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.